Welcome to Psychology Tidbits. Join Dr. Carlos as he explores the many areas of the human mind.
If you're listening to this podcast on Psychology Tidbits, this is a segment that we did over the other podcast that I have called Inside the World of Trauma. So you can check us out over there. And if you're listening to us on the Inside the World of Trauma podcast, you can hear our other podcast, Psychology Tidbits, where we give you little studies in psychology that come out every week. So these are the two areas right now that you can explore if you like, those two podcasts. And if you're listening to this on psychological theories, then you can hear the other two. Donald KALSCHED is a Jungian psychologist, K-A-L-S-C-H-E-D, who has made significant contributions to the field of trauma and psychotherapy. But today we're going to be talking about a theoretical framework for understanding and working with trauma, and he draws heavily on the Jungian psychology and also depth psychology and object relations and attachment theory. KALSCHED'S theory of trauma revolves around the concept of the inner world and the inner self. You see, when an individual experiences severe trauma, particularly during childhood, a fragmentation of the psyche occurs. Now, some people say we're born whole and then we get fragmented when trauma happens. Some people say we're starting to develop wholeness and trauma can impede this completion of wholeness. Either way, but according to KALSCHED, it's a fragmentation of a whole already, of the psyche. This fragmentation is a defense mechanism that serves to protect the core or true self from the overwhelming pain and terror associated with the trauma. So you can think here of sexual abuse, child abuse, sexual assault, whatever it may be. And each one of those has a different level of trauma. You can't look at trauma as being all the same. There's going to be different levels because of frequency, intensity, the type of trauma, the duration of the trauma, how often it happened. Back to this. KALSCHED describes two main aspects of the fragmented inner world, the persona and the shadow. The persona represents the adapted and socially acceptable self that a person presents to the outside world. It acts as a defense mechanism and a mask, hiding the vulnerable and wounded aspects of the individual. We all do it. We have different masks, per se, for different individuals that we engage with, whether it's our parents, family, siblings, friends, lovers, workers, employers, whatever it may be. The shadow, on the other hand, is different. It represents the repressed and disowned parts of the self that have been banished to the unconscious due to their association with the trauma. Now, the shadow consists of a lot of different things as well, but this one we're referring to the trauma, but the shadow can also consist of those thoughts that you wouldn't tell anybody about, things you're embarrassed about, things you'd be ashamed about, things that go against civil society. We all have a little shadow inside of us. It's the ability to control that makes us different than others who can't control their shadows. Back to this. According to KALSCHED, the fragmented inner world often gives rise to the formation of what he calls self-care systems, or inner complexes. These self-care systems are psychological structures and aim to protect the individual from further harm and keep the trauma at bay. However, they limit our personal growth. This young, creative, internal self that we have. A lot of people think mental health, when you're healthy mentally, you have this inner creativity, this inner desire to explore the world, this love and happiness. But this limits it. It limits our personal growth and can lead to symptoms such as anxiety and depression and other psychological difficulties or comorbidities. KALSCHED emphasizes the importance of establishing a safe and trusting therapeutic relationship. The role of the therapist is there to help the client gradually explore and integrate the fragmented aspects of their inner world through a process of active imagination, dream work, and dialogue with the various parts of the psyche. Some also have another theory called structural dissociation, which we'll talk about another day. The client then can gradually reconnect with their true self and find healing. The theory of trauma emphasizes the significance of understanding that inner world and the psychological defenses. Let's talk about some of those psychological defenses. He emphasizes the presence of two important figures, inner figures, in the theory of trauma, the inner protector and the inner persecutor. The inner protector is an inner figure that emerges in response to trauma to shield and defend the wounded inner self. It acts as a guardian, attempting to keep the individual safe from further harm. The inner protector can take various forms, such as an internalized parent, a strong figure, or eventually even a spiritual guide. Its primary function is to maintain a sense of control and safety. It's a defense mechanism. Just as a client sees a therapist and the therapist asks him about something, the client gets defensive. It's actually more than likely the inner protector, according to KALSCHED, trying to protect themselves from feeling this pain. They feel the therapist is approaching an area that's too scary or too painful for them to contact. Then the other side is the inner persecutor. It represents an internalized voice or figure that perpetrates self-blame, self-criticism, and self-sabotaging behaviors. This one's often associated with guilt and shame and unworthiness that arise from the traumatic experiences. It happens a lot with sexual assault victims and child abuse victims. The inner persecutor can manifest critical thoughts, harsh judgments, or even self-destructive behaviors. The inner protector and the inner persecutor are intertwined in a complex relationship. The inner protector aims to safeguard the individual from external threats, as I mentioned earlier, and it can sometimes become overprotective and restrict that personal growth that I was talking about that we all desire, or as Maslow would say, self-actualization in the pyramid, and emotional exploration as well. It limits that too. The inner persecutor may emerge to reinforce the belief that the individual is unworthy of healing or deserve of further suffering. This will be found in CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, when they talk of the three core beliefs: unworthiness, hopelessness, and helplessness. And so you can see how they interact with each other, the different theories. KALSCHED also emphasizes the need to develop a compassionate and empathetic relationship with these inner figures. The therapist would work collaboratively with the client to understand the role and purpose of the inner protector and the inner persecutor. What are they protecting? And why are they so critical? Recognizing their intentions while also exploring their limitations. Overall, the theory of trauma highlights the complex inner dynamics that arise in response to trauma, including the presence of the inner protector and persecutor. Understanding and working with these inner figures, as well as everything else we mentioned, is an integral part of the therapeutic process in the KALSCHED trauma theory. That's it for now.